what we're going to go over, if we go to the next slide, please, yeah, is we have 4 things that we want to cover. So we're going to look about what is ethics and compliance, why is it important, some of the key elements of an ethics and compliance program that make it successful, and talk about how we can teach it or integrate it into our activities. Okay, so I want everyone to be thinking, you know, we always say in the roundtable, you shouldn't just come here for the food. You should be coming here to learn something that you can use. And so, you know, write down that idea that you have to use what we're talking about, and then we'll also we'll have lots of opportunities for discussion. So we're going to have Michelle and Steve also participate, and they will be doing some of the presentations. Before we get into this topic, want to mention the UCCS Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative resources. For instance, have you checked out our YouTube table or our YouTube channel for the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative? If you haven't, if you've gone to the Daniels Fund, all you gotta do, if you're in UCCS, you just Google UCCS, actually even on Google, UCCS space DFEI, and you will get to our page, or it's uccs.edu/DFEI, and it'll go right to our page. And on that page is a YouTube link, and it'll take you right to our YouTube. And on it are all the faculty roundtables, other resources, the Ethics First events, recaps, and things like that, okay? But last year, October 20th, we did a virtual Ethics and Compliance Careers and Resources, and that video is there. And it still is very valid. It has some of the information that we're going to be talking about today as well. So that resource is there for everybody. The Ethics and Compliance Initiative is a professional association of ethics and compliance professionals. It also does the research. You might have heard of the National Business Ethics Survey. It's now the Global Business Ethics Survey. They do it every year or every 2 years, and it is the benchmark for the United States. I mean, they actually interact with the Department of Justice on sentencing guidelines information. They are almost like a lobbyist for the ethics and compliance profession. Well, we have an organizational membership for it, and because of that organizational membership, any person that is employed with UCCS could access these resources. They have statistics, they have reports, they have benchmark information, they have cases, they a whole case bank, which is really neat. There's all tools on how to write a code of conduct, how do you try to instill an ethical culture. So there's all kinds of resources available. The Business Ethics Leadership Alliance is part of Ethisphere. Ethisphere magazine is another organization that does the world's most ethical companies. Have you heard that? So they are the ones that go through and identify who are the world's most ethical companies. And it's published in Forbes. It's a huge thing. Usually if a company has, gotten it, they're scared to death they're gonna lose it, okay? So that's what Ethisphere does. Bella Hub, the Business Ethics Leadership Alliance, is a place for resources that the psychological safety one from US Bank, the handout, that came from that. And there are a lot of resources available on there. And also because of our membership, anybody who is from UCCS, employee or faculty, would be able to access these resources if they wish. And they are amazing. They have, especially with the cybersecurity, they have a cybersecurity risk ebook with templates on how to do a risk assessment on cybersecurity in an organization. They have amazing things in the health field and banking and finances. The US Bank is a huge contributor of different information. So no matter what discipline, they have something that you could use.
So again, my name is Michelle Brown, and as I mentioned in my brief introduction, I'm an MBA student, but I'm also a writing teacher, so I'm going to make you guys write a little bit today. It's just deep in the bones of my nature. So if you could please, just for a minute before we get into the next slide, I want you to take a minute to think about how we talk about ethics and compliance in tandem with each other. It's like they hold hands. We always talk about them side by side. But I want to take a minute today to think about what those things mean individually. So take a minute and just write down some notes for yourself. What is ethics? What is compliance? And while you're thinking about the what, you might also want to think about the why. So why do we care about ethics? Why do we care about compliance? Why are these two things often discussed together? All right, so if you're joining us online today, if you want to put some of your answers in the chat, that would be great. We can start comparing those with the conversation that we have here. For those of you here, who can offer me a definition of ethics specifically?
So what I wrote was a set of moral standards shared by a group that influences or guides decisions and actions.
It's a really good definition. Debbie, I'm going to look to you. I feel like these definitions are just tattooed in your brain.
So if you've gone through new hire orientation recently, I always say like ethics is doing the right thing when nobody is looking. It's also ingrained in your culture. And then do you want to talk about compliance? You might wait. Just do.
Well, I feel bad to
first.
make you come back twice.
It's totally up to you. I'm good either way.
How about this? Does
Steps.
anybody want to offer their definition of compliance? That way we'll kind of take our definitions and then compare them to our in-house expert.
You have to talk real loud or else we have to.
Go ahead.
hear it.
My kind of elementary definition was following the rules.
So following the rules. So ethics are,
The set of rules and compliance is following.
okay, so ethics being a set of rules shared by a community, shared by a group of people, that's what's meant to serve the better good. And then compliance is actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
So if we have the rules, actually following them.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add, the only other thing that I would add to it is that if you have a good ethical culture, you have actually a more compliant culture. So that's why I always put the two of them together, because if you have a good ethical culture, you're also going to have people who are wanting to do the right thing, but they're also watching out so that they're looking out for the betterment of the community. So if people are non-compliant, that they are actually doing something about that to make it better. So.
And I imagine if you have the opposite of that, where you
Yes.
have a lack of ethics and a heightened sense of compliance, then it starts to feel punitive. It starts to feel like you absolutely must do this, or there are repercussions and consequences.
I always look at it too as like owner versus renter. So like if you own somewhere, you're going to be looking out, you're going to be picking up trash, you're going to be taking care of it. Whereas a renter, you're like, I don't care. Let's have a party and spill all your stuff everywhere. So those are the other things I look at when I compare the two. Like, what's the owner versus
Thank you. Delaney, go ahead. Let's look at some established definitions to go with that. Make sure we have a clear view of the board. Ethics being the value system, the guiding factors that influence our decision making. And then as Debbie said, doing the right thing even if nobody is looking. That means that we do this through ethics policies that promote the rationalization for values and integrity. Whereas compliance represent those rules and regulations, the things that actually hold us accountable to that form of ethics. They meet legal requirements, which is why we have investigators. It's why we have Debbie's CECO position, so that we have some accountability for those legal requirements here on campus and in any organization. And then a word, like I said, that makes it feel like there is a standard to uphold in making sure that we are meeting those ideas of compliance. So these compliance policies discourage opportunities for rule breaking. So there's kind of a balance here. Like ethics can be seen as this like opportunity to do the right thing, whereas compliance is viewed as a, which you better do, because otherwise there are consequences. Yes, Bruce, absolutely. That's a really great further definition of
Can you read that?
compliance. Yeah. Tracy, do you mind opening that?
Yeah, sorry.
So Bruce says compliance means abiding by practices and rules developed and instituted through a policy process by persons in a community for the sake of personal and institutional thriving and attainment of agreed upon purposes and goals. Compliance is not random. It is meant to be something that helps us best understand what those appropriate processes are. And it's much easier to follow, like Bruce said, when those policies are previously established and clear to the members within that community.
Debbie knows this well. The ethics and compliance function is actually fairly young. Really wasn't a formal profession until after the 70s and the naughty work that the defense industry was doing. That's why the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act came about. But ethics and compliance profession has actually developed over the years and is a very, they have a lot of good practices that they have developed. And the federal sentencing guidelines also is kind of a framework for a good ethics and compliance program. But basically there are about, you can narrow it down to 5 elements. The first one is creating a program structure, which is, it doesn't have to be an office. So having that structure includes, where does it report to? How much influence do they have? How much do they report to the powers to be? But then the second one is to establish corporate standards or corporate guidelines of code of conduct, policies, consider the diversity and inclusiveness of, if you're global or if you have a lot of students or staff, for instance, at a university that don't speak English or are how could they learn about the ethics and compliance? And so, or how to do the right thing. So the code of conduct is actually a guideline of what behavior they want you to have in your organization. Oh, go back. Okay, thank you. Third is educate the workforce. And this was the training that Debbie does in the orientation, right? We don't have, we've had some changes because of COVID too in trainings, but a lot of times you'll have, I just got the Cleary Act, you have to do that training, you have to do all kinds of training. If you're a new employee, you have to do tons of training, right? And our ethics first event last week at UCCS with Sam Silverstein and the workshop and the panel on accountability, that really was a way of educating the workforce. So it's not just training, like sitting in a classroom or doing the online training that sometimes you think, really, they're asking that question about one little tiny thing, It's also about just having a lot of opportunities to talk about ethics and learn about ethics. The fourth is create investigation procedures, and that includes reporting mechanisms. How do people let their supervisors or the department know or the organization know that there's something going wrong? I mean, the whistleblower on Facebook is, right? I mean, it's just amazing. My husband keeps saying, why don't you invite her to the campus? Wouldn't she be great? And I'm sitting there going, well, yeah, but she's probably a little busy right now. She's, in front of Congress. But yeah, so, and then whistleblower protection, retaliation. We're afraid to speak up. And so how can we make sure that happens? And when something happens, is the investigation confidential? Is it accurate? Are they actually finding out what happens? And do they let the organization know the result? Without maybe providing all the details, but at least if somebody knows an investigation is going on, it would be nice to know kind of, that they took it seriously. And then the fifth one is assessing program effectiveness, which is measuring ethical performance and controls, things like that. Okay, so with that, we can go to the next slide and talk about why it's important. And I'm going to start out, and then I'm going to have Steve come up and talk a little bit about the next one. The first reason why it's important to have the knowledge about what is involved with an ethics and compliance program, about all of these different things that in the handout, there's actually 9 things that the ECI measure. And we've done that survey here, and we have the results. We did it how many years? 2 or 3, Debbie?
Yeah.
So it's all on the ethics first? 2, at least 2.
At least 2.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what they found is that if you have more of those ECA program elements, then the employees feel better to handle misconduct and to handle those ethical issues. It's interesting, Lockheed Martin implemented giving voice to values with Mary Gentile. We've implemented it as well in our Voicing Ethical Values program here at UCCS. And the Ethics and Compliance office, one of their officers, had told me, he said, yeah, it's great. The problem is our leaders think that it's not working because our hotline reports are low. And what happened was people, instead of calling the hotline, they would call, instead of reporting it, they'd say, I have this issue going on. I'm going to try these techniques. And they're actually solving the ethical issues or misconduct before it gets big. You know? And so actually, if you have a good ethics and compliance program, you won't see as much misconduct because they'll be able to deal with it to prevent it. So next slide is a quote from the chairman, president, and chief executive officer of Schnitzer Steel. And she says, employees are picking employers that are aligned with them on impact or personal values. People didn't used to talk about values. That said, today, values and purpose resonate very differently than compliance or conduct. And I'm going to ask Steve to give some of his ideas about this, about choosing an employer.
So as you can see from my mask, Shills. I got an opportunity to work at Shills. I have a foot injury right now, so otherwise I'd still be there. But I align my values and my principles with the company. First thing they asked me in my interview was, what are you passionate about? And first thing I said was, I'm a big sports guy. Secondly, ethics and compliance. And they kind of like, oh, wow, never heard that before. But it created a conversation. I can be on the sales floor and I have every right to speak up to a manager if I think they are doing something against what the company policies and their ethical standards are, which didn't happen very often. So I think it's really important that when students are looking for a new career once they graduate, to really take a real deep-seated thought in how am I, what company do I want to go with? I've already started on the grad portion of it, looking, and I look at what their mission statement is. I look at their core values. I look at their code of ethics. Is it even on their website? So different things like this will actually, it makes a big difference. And I walk into Shills on the weekends. They want me back really bad. And I said, I would love to come back. The reason being is because I trust you. We're aligned. The employees actually tell the managers what we need. That never happens in any retail setting I've ever been in. But the importance is that psychological safety, I'm able to actually feel comfortable, give them feedback without any retaliation. So I feel safe to work there. I feel safe as a shopper there. And I still go back, and my management training courses that I need feedback from leadership, they don't have managers, they have leaders. That's another big difference. They're very just in tune with, we want the next leaders for the new stores that are going to open up. New leaders for people to replace those people. The total alignment with that organization is just off the charts. So if you ever want a good role model to look at for that, go talk to anybody in a white shirt and a tie and chills.
It was interesting, those of you that were at the ethics first, they were talking about, Sam Silverstein was talking about culture and how it can be culture by design or by default. You know, some of the Shields and Chick-fil-A, they were by design and they had good customer service. Okay, next slide. We're going to go into now the key elements of what we think from our class discussions and the focus of an ethics and compliance program that might apply to everyone as well. Based on this model here, it's called the High Quality Program Assessment from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative. And we also did that here. I did it first for a conference, and then we worked with Debbie, and we got a whole lot of people at UCCS that actually took this assessment to see how they feel it is meeting all of the requirements for a high quality program. Now, I didn't give you the access to the material. If you're interested, there's a whole blue ribbon report with details, as well as a measurement report, or you can take my class. But you'll see that, but let me talk about how this kind of relates to the ethics and compliance program. The first part is actually the strategy. And what it says is that the ethics and compliance should not be a separate function from the business strategy or the organization strategy. It should be aligned. You know, their goals should be aligned with the goals of the organization. Their mission and their values should, you know, be aligned with good ethics and compliance practices. And so when you talk about strategy, this is where the program structure and where it's reporting and how involved they are. One of the examples that I have, I used to work for multinational companies, and we would go in starting business in other countries. And you know, the ethics in other countries might be different. And we had issues where they're saying, oh, you don't need to register with the government, or you can invoice, and oh, we're paying under the table, and all kinds of things. And if you're going to do business in that country and you're a US company, you better make sure all of your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, you know? I mean, you can't cut corners. It has speaking up next, although really in practice, the risk management is before this. So this model, they read, this was the beginning. So risk management was the other part, is looking at the risks and identifying, you know, what can you do to mitigate those risks? What are the risks in your area that are the most important? Social workers probably have tons of risks, right? Do they know how to recognize those risks and how to mitigate them? What kind of controls can you put into place, policies, but more importantly, how are you going to train the people that need to be trained on those risks? Speaking up is then talking about being able to be comfortable reporting misconduct and not having any retaliation, things like that. Culture of integrity, that just goes to say that You can't have a good ethics and compliance program if you don't have an ethical culture. And I'm not talking about the formal culture. I'm talking about that informal culture. You know, if everybody has, you know, Enron had a wonderful code of ethics and all kinds of, you know, notepads with all their values on it, but yet they actually, you know, did practices against their values. So culture is very important. And then accountability, which was our theme last week. Accountability in this high quality program is actually talking about that if there is misconduct, they take responsibility for things, right? And we're accountable to the people to make sure that the investigation is, you know, confidential, it's independent, and it's accurate. Accountability has to do with that about, you know, if something happens, that there are consequences and they're consistent. Okay, so that is the framework that the ECI uses, and that's what we do in the class that we have. So I'm going to ask Michelle to come up, and we're going to get you to work.
Okay, so like a good student, I want to share with you some notes that I have from class this summer on psychological safety. These notes come directly from the ECI high quality program training that we did. So we can look at psychological safety from an organizational level, and then we can also look at it for what individual leaders are responsible for doing to uphold that psychological safety. So psychological safety means employees can raise issues and concerns without fear. It also creates a culture where employees can learn from their mistakes. If you mess up, it's not so punitive that you're just like frozen in time and you're afraid to ever take a risk again. And it teaches us to hold each other accountable. Importantly, this culture should never be expected. It is not automatic that this type of psychological safety will exist within an organization. It's the responsibility of all members within that organization to uphold that psychological safety. So as individual leaders, we should be vocal and visible whenever possible in our appreciation for speak up culture, rather than dismissing when people bring issues of concern. They should be lauded in some way for you know, the bravery or the courage that it takes to be able to speak up and point out when something is wrong. This means that leaders are also responsible for providing updates and conclusions about the closure for investigations, whether that involves individuals within an individual business unit or across the entire organization. They should find authentic and consistent ways to communicate openly and honestly with their employees, and they should value learning through risk-taking. So have a really open mindset versus a closed mindset about how organizations can improve their psychological safety, what we can learn from speak up culture, investigations that follow, and the closure that comes with that. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to put you guys into small groups. And so here we're going to ask you guys to think about these things on your own, and then we'll have you share some ideas with each other. So think about people with whom you feel comfortable bringing up difficult issues or giving feedback. Maybe think of somebody, whether it's in your current organization or an organization you've worked with in the past, someone who's really made you feel comfortable to have these conversations. So that next question is, what characteristics do they have, or what do they do to put you at ease? What is it about this person that just makes it seem like you trust them? Is it maybe a track record of theirs? Is it just who they are as a person? Is it the interpersonal relationship that you share with them? What has made you comfortable to be able to go to them? And then on the other side of that, I want you to think of a situation in which you felt comfortable raising issues or giving feedback. Where was that? Who were you with? And what happened? So once you've taken a little bit of time to think about these things together, on the yellow pads or in the chat window, we'll ask you guys to come up with a list. So what are the characteristics of those who enable speak up culture, those who enable psychological safety? And then what happens within these situations where there is a real issue that comes up? What is it about that organization, that leader, that makes it comfortable to bring that to a point of conversation? Well, we're running out of time. So
Yes,
as much
I
as
know.
love to,
Anyway, so basically, we won't have time to debrief really, but really,
here's what I might ask for. When you guys thought about those individually and then you came together, I imagine you started looking for patterns. Like what were some similarities, maybe some qualities or some characteristics? So if you don't mind maybe just shouting some of those out, what were some of those commonalities that you recognized in your individual situations?
Listening, being heard.
Being an active listener, that is so important, and feeling truly like you've been heard when you bring those issues up. Excellent.
I think someone who lives it, who walks the walk of integrity and is gonna comfortable going to that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you recognize by the role that they lead and the model that they act as themselves, they don't just talk about these things, they truly embody these things, that makes us a lot more comfortable bringing ethical issues to them. Anything from this side?
thank you. Karen has something too.
Perfect.
And in general, just somebody who's non-reactive and more responsive, like just being thoughtful and proactive in the way that things are addressed.
That's such a huge thing. I know something that I'm really guilty of is I have a terrible time controlling my facial expressions. Sometimes you need somebody who's really stoic to be able to hear those things and not react to them. That makes it a lot more comfortable. Clearly add that to my to work on list. Karen, let's see. Active listening, yes. The ability to talk through solutions openly, clearly explain the position and being transparent, no repercussions, culture of like-mindedness. That transparency is so important. I've always appreciated in the past when I bring up ethical concerns and the person I'm doing that with is willing to kind of talk through their ideas with me. So it doesn't just sound like they are the mastermind that has all of the solutions, but to show me that process they go through to lead to that outcome. That kind of transparency is so helpful when it comes to having these tough conversations. And having that kind of transparency also helps with the accountability that we had talked about earlier. Steve?
Something to even think about too is leaders need to have that emotional intelligence. So like you were saying about your facial expressions, but that comes with practice and everything. But having the ability to maintain a calmness and be actively listening and not just making assumptions.
Yeah. And honestly, being educated in these sorts of things helps us not be so reactive because it's not the first time we've ever heard of it. And it's also not the first time we've ever thought about it. So I'll hand it over so we can have that.
Great, so we'll just finish up. I hope you liked that exercise. Go ahead to the next slide. What we're going to do is, just to tie it together, psychological safety allows speaking up, which creates an ethical workplace and an ethical culture. Okay, so that's a really neat graphic that was also available from the Bella site information. So if we go to the next slide, I want to wrap up, and I'm sorry that we didn't have as much time to do a lot of discussion, but why is this important for education and what we can do to educate those people that we're responsible for. Employees whose managers engage regularly with them about ethics and compliance are 2 times more likely to be comfortable approaching the manager with concerns or questions, are 90% more likely to have faith in the organization's commitment to non-retaliation, and 24% more likely to believe they have a personal responsibility in making sure the company does the right thing. Okay, that goes back to that accountability. Next slide. Another statistic is the top 3 reasons why people do not report observed misconduct. 46% said they did not report misconduct because anonymous reporting was not available. They weren't willing to put themselves out there. 32% said they did not report misconduct because there was no designated person or office at their organization for them to contact. And 26% said they did not report misconduct because they did not know who to contact at all. And Okay, so that's why it's important to have these resources available for employees. Next slide. Okay, what can we do? NASPA, Student Center for Public Trust, created an ethical leadership certification. It just raised its price up to $50. But because you're affiliated with UCCS and we have the Daniels Fund Ethics Initiative, students are able to take this online certification program and get a certification from the NASPA Student Center for Public Trust, which is actually something good in their resume. And it goes through all kinds of things about being an ethical leader, how to handle conflict, and actually have this certification. Because you're UCCS, affiliated with UCCS and the Southern Colorado Ethics Consortium, we actually pay for half of the student's cost. So the student only pays $24.99 and we pay the rest. So that is something, if you're interested in, you let me know and I'll give you the information on how to set it up. And you don't even have to do anything. All you have to do is send an email to the Student Center for Public Trust and ask for it. It's all, the students sign up on their own and pay their part. And it's a really nice way to get students some certification that they've actually understood ethical leadership. For faculty, and I'm not sure about pre-collegiate, if high schoolers could do it. I think they could, but I would have to check. The thing is for faculty, you would actually get PowerPoints and PDFs with discussion questions. And so it's amazing, the materials, and you can see how your class is doing, how far they are. And the University of Wyoming actually puts it in their class where they do a couple, a module every couple of weeks and then discuss it. So we also have the syllabus for that if you're interested in looking at it. The next option is, again, at UCCS, we have an ethics and compliance and business class. And it's offered in fall session B this year. And if we have enough interest, we'll also have it in the summer. It's an 8-week online class. Next slide. And in that class, they take what's called the E2c Training. And it's a training that's online. It's by, we actually had L&E Entertainment is an improv company. So they actually have little videos that are kind of like introducing some avatars. And they do that online. And then after they complete the training, they could get LPEC certification, which is the Leadership Professional and Ethics and Compliance certification from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative.